Hi everyone, my name is Neil Aryan, and in this video we're going to be talking about the shared responsibility model and IAM. This is the 10th video in a series of videos that I'm going to be doing that talks about different topics in the AWS CLP exam. The first thing we're going to talk about is a shared responsibility model. And that's an idea that the customer in the AWS shares different roles and responsibilities. And one main idea covers the fundamental concepts of the responsibility model. Customer is responsible for the integrity of the data in the cloud, which means anything inside S3 buckets or EC2 instances, and AWS is responsible for the integrity of the data of the cloud. And this includes physical security of data centers and global infrastructure. Now, here's a list of all the different things that the customer is responsible and AWS is responsible for. Keep in mind, you will need to memorize this list. You will need to know what the customer is responsible for and what AWS is responsible for. It's a really important set of detail that you need to know. And I remember on when I took the AWS exam, there were a couple questions about which one of these is an AWS only um, responsibility and which one of these is a customer responsibility. So you will need to be able to pick out which is which. And you can use some logic to identify that. You can think all of the software, compute storage, database, and networking, those are all software related. Those are all AWS. And then anything that has anything to do with hardware or global infrastructure, such as edge locations, availability zones, and regions, you can just tell that those are because they're hardware and they're global infrastructure, that's an AWS responsibility. And a customer's responsibility is data. They're required for the um, security of their data. And that would be through platform and applications, what application you use, what platform you use them on. Um, the choice that you make when choosing those is also part of the security that you're implementing. Then your use of identity and access management, who's doing what, you need to make sure that all of that is still set into place and you're not, giving the wrong people access to things that they don't need access to, and then all of a sudden they make a mistake and there's a huge issue. Then your operating system, your network, and your firewall configuration is also the customer's responsibility. And then encryption on both the client and server side is the customer's responsibility. And finally, the network trafficking protection is also the customer's responsibility. And that would be the use of AWS Direct Connect VPC and VPN. Now, in customer responsibility, when using AWS, you or the customer maintain complete control over your content, which also means you are responsible for your content. You're responsible for managing security requirements for your content, including what content gets stored on AWS and through which channels it goes through. For example, if it uses through Direct Connect or if it needs to go through Direct Connect, you will have to use it. And if you don't, you are responsible for any packet loss that you encounter on the way. Then, which AWS services you use and who has access to that kind of content. That's access and identity management, which we're about to talk to. And how access rights are granted, managed, and revoked. That's also your responsibility as the customer. Now, AWS's responsibility is to manage and ensure security of the data centers. They're to ensure the validity of the hardware and software infrastructure, network infrastructure, and virtualization infrastructure. Now let's talk about IAM, which is AWS Identity and Access Management. It is a tool that can be utilized by an entire organization to keep track of services, users, resources, and be able to track any changes made in the cloud. And these can be achieved through the use of IAM users, groups, and roles. There's something called IAM policies, which determine the rules that are attributed to the users, groups, or roles, and multi-factor authentication, which ensures the person who's signing into the user is in fact the person who owns that user account and not just someone else who has their credentials. Let's talk about the root user. The root user is the identity that comes with creating an AWS account. The root user is accessed by signing in with the email and password that you use to create your AWS account. You can think of the root user as being similar to the owner of the coffee shop, such that it has complete access to all of the AWS services and resources in the account, but it doesn't necessarily work in the coffee shop as, say, a cashier or a barista. For that, it creates something called um, users, and these users are created from the root account. What you do is you give it permissions to create other users, and that the first user you create is essentially the person who or the account that does all the work. And this is done just to ensure security because if something bad were to happen or an accident were to happen with the root account, it could delete a lot of your cloud. So that's why when you first create a root account, you be very careful with how you use it. You minimize the use of it, and you use users or subsidiary accounts to ensure that you can grow in the way that you would like to. You also, as the owner of the root account, can define what privileges the users can get when performing their duties. Now, some of the best practices with a root account are to avoid use for everyday activities. You only want to use the root account for activities that are exclusive to the root account. Examples of these are changing the AWS support plan and changing account details. For day-to-day tasks, you use the root account to make a user account and then set user permissions for that user account. So an IAM user is an identity that you create in AWS. It represents the person or application that interacts with AWS services and resources. It consists of just two things, the name and credentials. Now, AWS best practices with user account. So AWS recommends that you create individual IAM users for every single person that needs to access AWS. You do this so that a group of people don't have one account's credentials, and then you can't really track what individual person made a specific change if some trouble arises. And even if you have multiple employees that require the same level of access, you still want to create an individual IAM user for each of them. And this is just so that you can track them, and it provides an additional level of security by allowing each IAM user to have a unique set of credentials. Now, an IAM policy is a document that gives a user permissions or denies them permissions for AWS services and resources. These policies enable you to use customers' data to levels to access resources. Sorry, IAM policies enable you to customize user levels and access resources. For example, you can allow users to access all of the S3 buckets within your account or only one specific bucket in your account. Now let's talk about the principle of least privilege. The idea that you give users the least amount of control and just enough to be able to perform their designated tasks. This is a security measure and reduces risks and accidental deletions of important tools within your business. Um, this is an idea that will come on the exam, most definitely. I've seen it a couple times on practice exams, and it's a quite an important idea in terms of AWS in general because I believe when creating a user account and a um, creating policies, they ask you to use the principle of least privilege, and they only allow you to select what you want to give your user or your role or your group. You can't select what you don't want, and that just ensures that you know what you're allowing your employees to do with their IAM privileges. Now, an IAM group is a collection of IAM users. And when you assign an IAM policy to a group, all of the users in this group are granted permissions specified by the policy. These really exist for convenience so that you don't have to assign one policy to thousands of individual employees if you have a company that uses thousands of employees in a singular group. For example, if all of the finance people use IAM to access financial documents, you don't want to go around and give every new employee of the financial team a specific set of policy. Instead, you put all of them into one group, and as new ones come in and old ones leave, you can alter the policies of the entire group, or you can just alter the group, and that will be all of it. You don't have to deal with a policy for every single finance user. Now, an IAM role is a temporary promotion, and they're used to grant access to an employee or a group for a temporary amount of time for a temporary set amount of actions. When someone is put into a new role, they forfeit all of their old responsibilities and they assume new ones. Now let's talk about multi-factor authentication. It's you've probably seen this before. It's a security feature that ensures that a login to the AWS system is legitimate and not by a third party unauthorized user who may have malicious intent. It works by when a user logs into their AWS account to get into the company system, a code will be sent to their MFA device. The user must input the code from the MFA device into the device that they would like to log into the AWS system with or the device with the AWS console. Once they put in their code, they're then allowed to access the different tools and data that they have access to using their IAM permissions. Now, thank you for watching this video. In this video, we covered three things. We covered shared responsibility model, we covered IAM, and the MFA. And in the next video, we're going to be talking about organizations and compliance. Thank you for watching this video. My name is Neil. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment if you enjoyed the video. Thank you and have a wonderful day.